The Butterfly's Dream by Kerber's 314, Chapter 37, Part Purgatory 2, Part 2. Alone again, huh? He was no longer there, if he had ever been there. If this hadn't been anything but a dream in my failing consciousness, could I even dream anymore? Sleep past the time that wasn't there, the period of resting but a snap of the finger, just like being awake. How many times have I had this same train of thought running through my head? Once, twice, a dozen? Have I ever not thought about how alone I am, alone even in company, alone with myself and my emotions? Bitterness wants to define me, rage, jealousy, such strong feelings with space to occupy and expand. Boundless, should I not try and restrain them? Why should I? Because they are out there on the other side, and so here I am, a grain of sand amidst the eternal desert, waiting for them to come and find me. You little Kunk. Oh, so you are awake. Not so much as pausing for this little exchange, Naruto continued what he was doing with the sturdiness of a monk. The brush made from a wood sliver, steel wire, and his own hair continued its journey from the man's collarbone up, his throat tickling the jugular, making that hate-filled eye twitch at the gall and try even harder to tear open a portal into another dimension. What are you doing to me? I see that whatever that was is wearing off. The Siberic diatribe was water off his back as Naruto concentrated on a particularly difficult character right underneath the man's chin. Too bad. Ah, there we go. The rising sun reflected off the shattered glass from the fallen commentator's box and illuminated his work. As soon as I can but blink, I will tear you to shreds, QB or no. That's your right, hand flying against time, in contrast to his clones who were carefully and deliberately doting on Ruby as she lay on a bed of salvaged stadium seats not far away. If that's how you feel after we're done, however, if you try, I will not fail to stop you. As sure as he was that his latest masterpiece would be completed before the sun fell on the broken arena, the remnants of the final battle, and the building blocks of a new chapter. You think you can beat me? Ha! When I was your age, I was killing the Yandame, not to mention your mother. It's probably not a good idea to distract me while I'm working on this. His hand wavered over the current symbol as he contemplated all the different ways he could modify the seal he was building to cause immeasurable amounts of pain to this man who had taken so much from him. Only by casting his mind back to his better half could he continue with his routine. Every ensuing stroke became easier as he remembered that determination. Besides, you won't need to say anything, because pretty soon I'll know it all. Just what do you think you're going to accomplish? I will willingly tell you the ways things will play out in as much excruciating details as you'd like. I will gladly tell you of the horrors that exist outside your rose-colored world, which led me to this conclusion. I don't doubt you would. After tickling the frozen man's ears with the brush for his own amusement, Naruto faced him so that he could see the crooked smile he adorned. But you've probably been lying to yourself for so long that you don't remember what's real and what's not. So you understand, I got to see the truth for myself. Purposely pressing hard and letting his brush linger between Toby's eyebrows inordinately long, he backed off to see the haphazard sun spray Hindi in the center of his array, admiring it with a touch of glee before tossing the brush aside and settling himself down cross-legged in the spot he reserved. And, in turn, you will know my story. What? Without a mask, Toby appeared to express himself like the other human despite the deformities contorting his face, although maybe this was the first thing that truly frightened him, the possibility of being exposed to the madness, or having himself exposed. It was not clear. Are you insane? The grin answered everything he needed to know about that question. What about your little friend? You wouldn't be so foolish as to do something to endanger her? There was an unspoken question at the end of that observation that both heard clearly. That's why she's outside the circle, smile never diminishing. Toby looked past it to note this fact. She's also why I'm doing this. No, that's not true. I'm doing this because I want to be a better person for her. I want to try and make this life we shared count for something. And if that means understanding your story, Then so be it, as Toby continued to stand, as if that silver light struck him again. Naruto relaxed in his position and brought his left hand into an upward pointing fist, with index finger extended, while his right clamped down on that index finger and his thumb struck painfully into the center of the nail. Vaijira Mundra thusly complete. This seal is complex. You clearly have a wealth of knowledge stored up in that deranged mind. Sweating out what moisture was in his mouth, Toby continued to try and reason despite his failing words. But something like this, it's too complex. No person in the right state of mind would attempt to do such a thing. And even if you were, how do you know it will work? I don't. Smile now as serene as Buddha himself. Now to let go. But it was luck that got me this far. Luck and a little helping hand. Was that a scream far off in the distance? A little tippy-tapping on the walls of my cell, rattling of the bars? Or was that just me? Am I going insane in here, as he promised, or was he just my excuse to do so? There are no walls, no bars, no rattling like mice scurrying around inside my head. But the scream, enough to rouse me from my slumber, that was real as anything can be in this not place. I'd know it anywhere and nowhere. It was the shock of being brought out into the light after so long in the dark. Once upon a time, there was a boy, taken from its dark cave where everything was warm and familiar. It was thrust into the harshness of life with the lights that were too bright, noises that were too loud, hands that were too rough, and events which made no sense in comparison to the place where nothing ever happened. This child would grow, and as it would grow, it would come to learn that the world where nothing happened isn't such a bad place. Pleasures it erstwhile wouldn't have known blunted the rough edges for a time. Like for all of us, though, time marched on. As the years passed, this being which was once a child, would learn that even more harshness awaited it in this open space called life. Greater pleasure would have to but it would be a constant struggle against the idealized memory of the cave. Thus, it would come to a question presented while standing on its high overlooking those still trapped in that darkness. What if it was all worth it in the end? The answer was no. The answer was yes. Life, as it turned out, wasn't simply the place outside of the cavern. It was an endless series of caverns nestled like a matryoshka, and each station was another step into the larger world, which brought fiercer climbs and clearer views. On that ultimately perilous ascent, some souls inevitably got lost on the way and emerged from the fog mistakenly thinking they had reached the top. In the end, there was never any top, and all of them were crawling about blindly in the mist. This was the story of Uzumaki Naruto, of Ruby Rose, of Obito Uchiha, of all of us, and the lie they all live, the most wonderful lie of all. It didn't work. It couldn't have, for he felt no different than before, no more content and no less confused than he had been his entire life. Had he lied to himself, feigning to go up when in fact he was stalking his inevitable march downwards? There would be others waiting for him, at least. He would not be alone as he joined all those sinners he had slain. Familiar faces greeting him with pained smiles. Hidan, Kakasu, Nagato, Konan. Wait, something was different, wrong. Rather than try and think about it any more with his head, which felt like Yang had used him to vent her frustrations with a subpar hair care product, he did the merest less painful thing and opened his eyes. A smile greeted him, but not from any one of those hungry ghosts. Hey there, sleepyhead! Blinking flashed an image of another girl, one with purple markings on her cheeks. There weren't bruises and reddish-brown hair. That wasn't from the blood and mud caking everything around them. That wasn't the girl he was seeing now, but her face was anything but a lie. What happened after I passed out? Ruby asked as he slowly blinked awake. Though he would have liked to lay there forever, with his head in her lap and staring up at the fluffy clouds that lazily drifted on by, he too desired an answer to this question. So he sat up, tried to anyway, as both tired teens fumbled with limbs that wouldn't quite obey what their minds wanted them to do. Eventually they succeeded, leaning on one another to avoid further slapstick and a painfully short journey back down to the ground. Both sets of bloodshot eyes regarded the haphazardly strewn form of Toby. No, Obito Uchiha, as he lay dissociated from the white Setsu prosthetic, whimpering a bit as he slept restively. So, you won, huh? With a gaze begrudgingly with all kinds of understanding, he looked down at the pitiful creature. That remains to be seen, though once again he recognized the falsehood and aimed to correct it. Owie! Ruby exclaimed with a flinch, nearly toppling the two of them. What was that for? She asked, rubbing her bruised ribs. We won, Naruto emphasized, not entirely remorseful for the poke of his sly smile was anything to go by. Jerk, whispered endearingly, and with a little more force than necessary, she leaned her head into his, producing an audible bonk. What happens now? An open-ended question which stretched far higher than the prone remains of the Akatsuki in front of them, past the open top and into the blue sky free of those dark smudges called Grimm. A series of stories not yet written were contained inside, ready to be unleashed on that blank canvas. Now you die! A beautiful flower blossomed in his chest, petals as soft as liquid and as red as blood surrounded a sharp blackened stream that extended its way towards the sun. The smell was odd, but familiar. A metallic taste like quicksilver flowed from his mouth and washed out the name on the tip of his tongue. It was all rosy to him. A blossom which disappeared all too soon, leaving a gaping hole to be filled up by a blizzard of petals, too small and too scattered to accomplish the task. No, 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 no. Coming out of her semblance, she lay him down gently on her lap, same as before. Please, Naruto, speak to me. It wasn't like before. This wasn't a temporary slumber. Looking up to see her perfectly imperfect visage haloed by the sun, he felt at last like he could see the silver lining in it all. But he couldn't say so. He couldn't say a thing. It was too late. He still wasn't quick enough. The only thing which came was a drowned gurgle and flecks of blood which splashed against her face. It flowed like a river from his mouth and his chest onto the ground, a biblical flood, a plague. More emotions flowed from her heart into a body that could scarcely take it anymore. Though she tried not to, a blink of an eye was all it took for all the light in his face to fade. She screamed, a pinch, a slap, a fall, a shot in the gut, anything to wake her from this nightmare. Having walked the line so many times, she knew this was nothing but reality, horrifying clarity, as her heart tried to rattle its way out of her chest, and the blood still flowing in her veins ignited with the friction and tried to burn its way out. With anyone, anything at all watching as her witness, she would not be the only one to burn. It is no longer worth keeping him alive. Can't sense the fox, don't know what he did with it, nor the Rinnegan. Even if he's hiding it, at this point it's simply better to start over from scratch. The fox will reform, and we can always try again. Setsu regarded his curved blade of an arm, recently quenched with fresh nutrients. The lack of care displayed towards the seeming huntress wasn't a mistake. It was the correct decision to take out the bigger threat, as he knew exactly what the little one was going to do next. Don't worry, no one will interrupt us. They're still chasing after my clones. She stared at him, giving him a view of his current objective. Aspen-san was right. Those silver eyes are something special. They completely dissolve all the clones I had here. Perhaps I could even use them for my own goals. Pausing in its pontification, Setsu changed his attention to the second of the two weapons, swallowing the blunted one as fast as the other like a circus freak. Unlike the scythe, which he integrated, the Kabutorari simply disappeared into his gullet like a black hole. Might not be able to use those eyes as is, but in a few generations, a little more tweaking. Give it back. Huh? It was still smiling as the hand clamped over its face, fingers digging into those jaundiced eyes. Everything you stole! The plant's head became mulch, and just as rapidly her other hand shot out to the scythe, it still encompassed into its arm, aimed at recovering it all piece by piece. Yet, even without a head, the animated arbor skipped out of her range as she made no attempt to follow it. We took nothing. The black half reformed it first, garbling a response. We gave everything. You are our crop, this world, our garden. From the inconceivable gaps between the tiles, wires leapt and wrapped themselves around Zetsu, staking him upright like a tomato. No, we're not! Eyes as silver and sharp as that wire, she stood still as every atom in her body vibrated past physically and theoretical bounds, latent energy building up and speeding down those pathways provided. Setsu writhed and hissed as the water contained in his cells tried to boil itself out. You wanted a harvest? You got us! She wrapped the biting wire around her hands, painfully dragging the squirming creature forward. This world grows what it wants, and roses are weeds, too, you know. Setsu deformed as thin as an asparagus to escape, but Ruby yanked back anyway, having snagged what she wanted. Radiant Thorn fell into her grip as she seemingly tucked the other weapon in what remained of her combat dress. Maybe that's all any of us are, feeling like a blade of grass, mowed and trampled, pretty ugly, dangerous, useless. Doesn't matter. We're all part of this crazy jungle, and when we die, we return to the others. You're talking plants to a plant. You must be some kind of stupid. No, I'm fine. You know what? I'm stupid. And stupidly she attacked head-on before vanishing in a flurry of silver-tinted petals, which danced like lightning, next appearing behind the monster, bisecting him, quartering him, sixteenths. I'm mad too, and none of that matters. From these shredded remains came spores. The cloud of Zetsu drifted over to Obito's trembling form. Some wafted into his ragged lungs, while others stuck on the surface like mushrooms, quickly gestating and overtaking the damaged human in a skin, parasitic fungi, which rapidly reformed into a carbon copy of the plant man. Roses, weeds, beasts, humans, faunus, none of those names make a difference. With eyes wide, she drank in the blasphemous metamorphosis. She couldn't deny that which was the ugly truth. Like the cooling body laying just yonder, we're just people trying to live our lives. That's all this is. No response came as a singular red eye opened in the uncaring beast's forehead, and on the other side of its gaze, a corresponding portal opened next to Ruby as she threw herself out of the way and into the slipstream. If there's a greater purpose, more moral lesson, I don't care. Blue flames consumed her as she got closer to her target, but they were simply conducted by Berlice's guiding hand around her and the swinging which nearly nicked the demonic eye. I don't care about world peace or some greater good. I just want a chance to live my story. Vines attempted to restrain her, but they melted as soon as they got near the silver aura surrounding the wide-eyed girl trying to lasso the sun. The people close to me, to protect them, is that really too much to ask? Unhindered, she cocked her scythe back, and the aura followed. Coalescing around the metal, another blade grew, silver sheen and crescent shape mimicking the moon as it raced high overhead. They're all I have. Who are you? The Kamui vortex opened up just as she swung, intercepting the gleaming wave as it cascaded and tumbling and rocked the tide of stomach bile of everyone in Vale. To take that away, a lava flow of glass spilling into oblivion that crystalline speed down the drain in front of it, but also round through as it filled the infinite space and spilled over the edge. All three of Zetsu's eyes opened wide as that ocean of blades rushed towards him, seeing the only alternative was throwing himself out of the way. At the sound of 1,000 claws on 1,000 chalkboards being tumbled in the drum of a rock mill, when it impacted, reality appeared to bend around the axis created by the immense gravity, and the stadium lurched sideways in the air. Miraculously, everything held together. Until it didn't, and the bottom dropped out underneath them. Ruby didn't notice, simply staring at the spot of her devastation, which had been, like all her efforts up to that point, pointless. When the floor sunk to the pitch of a wheelchair ramp, she suddenly dashed upwards to where Naruto's body was, just starting to roll downhill. Sinking the tip of Radiant Thorn into the tiles, she latched herself on with one hand and caught his tumbling form with the other. With the strength left over from whatever incredible and useless power that had been, she clung on, simply trying not to be swept away. Though the world around her groaned and cried in agony as it was slowly torn apart, she heard his footsteps approaching. Unable not to, she opened her clenched eyes to glare at Setsu as he stood on the steep surface without a care for it, for them, for everything slowly crashing down. Just leave us alone! Holding as tightly as she once did, she dared the thing to try and separate the two of them in this endgame. If he'd wanted to, he could have. She knew that. All this time she knew she was pathetic, an unrealistic dreamer, an optimist, someone who never gave up. cruelly stubborn, set in your ways. I fail to see what it is he saw in you humans. Even as Setsum mutually approached, he still hoped against all, he still hoped she still hoped against all hope that reality might change if she willed hard enough. But you don't have to believe in something for it to be true, do you? Daring to look in that demonically swirling eye, what more could it do? She was already torn to shreds inside. Life isn't fair. Ruby! Setsu's head wiped to the side as if a meteor struck it, a bright yellow flaming meteor which turned out to be a shower raining down plainly scaled destruction on that overgrown flora. Maybe it doesn't need to be. Now, Weiss! Barrage Burrage finished, Yang slammed her fist into the floor, which by now had practically become a wall, and stared up at her sister with the bloody bundle quickly slipping from her grip. The path ahead was illuminated with a chair of circular runes, and she didn't think twice about letting go and blitzing up them. Yang clung tight to both, nothing compared to how she held onto the boy in her arms, but it was enough even as her elder sister kicked off and dragged the three of them into open air, scythe and all. They landed sooner than anyone could have anticipated, getting the wind knocked out of them, but not much else. That was a surreal feeling until she realized they had somehow ended up in a bullhead. Then it became simply incredible. Pyra, do it! Another voice called out, and she was surprised she even heard it over the rumble of the engine and labored pants of her sister, with her ear pressed tight against her heaving chest. The Amazonian's response was a primal yell, which roared out over all the background cacophony, including the mostly metallic structure, which had been abused far beyond what its designers had ever fathomed, and groaning like a beached whale. It was rapidly going belly up through a monumental effort as that redhead screamed her lungs out over them. Squeeze the fucker like a pancake, bringing a smile despite it all. Obliging, obliging, the Amazonian warrior gave one last concerned burst of exertion, fueled by the donation of aura from half the passengers in the bullhead. Once its keel was facing the sky, the anti-gravity engines in the bottom of the Colosseum were torn from their housings. The structure itself didn't last long in the free fall before it slammed down into the ground and kicked up a cloud of dust that almost swallowed Beacon. Yet the iconic tower still stood tall over the sea, trying to envelop it. There were cheers all around, elations of victory, and as the sun pierced through the rising plume and framed a fairy tale image, she was almost tempted to believe it. Opening like a long mouth from the abyss to reach out and pluck them from their ecstasy, the invisible attack struck their vehicle and shook them from their reveries. Those cheers turned into cries as the bullhead went into a tailspin, its counter engines having gone AWOL into a pocket dimension. This time, the crash was more realistic, more believable, not merely knocking the wind out of them, but knocking a good number unconscious as they were ricocheted off the hull. It was just her luck that the lifeless body wedged underneath cushioned her fall. As the only cognizant witness in that delirious lull, it was her obligation to once again hear the deliberate footfalls approaching their wrecked craft. Great and terrible, she listened to the monster Setsu approach unrelentlessly, like the heartbeats of a demon. Thump, thump, thump. She opened her eyes, the duty failing on her to watch the end unfold. The limp weight of her sister was gently removed from on top and placed aside, as was she, plucked from her reclined state like a babe, and without resisting propped up against an undamaged section of bullhead. It wasn't possible, for she never dreamed of serving a purpose, believing with every fiber of her being that as long as one kept up hope, that life could sometimes mimic those idyllic stories. Naruto, not quite. His voice dark and familiar, like the nighttime she longed to regain. Kurama, spoken as if it somehow made sense. You're back. Not quite, the blonde repeated, rolling his shoulders and cracking his neck. Call me Yin, for now. Oh, no, no such disappointment, if that's what he was expecting. Nice to meet you. Flinching as he poked the newly healed flesh, the Yin half Kurama looked back at his human counterpart with a half-lidded, praising gaze. You're a strange one, but as he turned back around, she could see a smile stretch the familiar whiskered marks from cheek to cheek. I think I'm starting to understand. Wait, he did, whether it was the pleading tone or the body doing it for him. He paused with his one foot out of the transport and the other striding towards the epicenter of the crash, still shrouded in dust like morning fog. Will you Will he come back? The Revenant didn't look at her, its guilt obvious in the weight on its shoulder. Maybe it would have been better not to say anything, to not build her hopes or dash them. That was what he reasoned, but it could not explain the lie that came from his mouth. Anything's possible. When Yin found Zetsu, it was busy fighting a losing battle with its stomach, disgorging the remains of its last meal as the one-armed Obito dragged himself forcibly from the maw of the creature. He let the two struggle for a while, partly because it looked too gross to touch either one, and partly because he wanted the plant man to suffer whatever heartburn this would cause him. He finally approached when the manifestation of Kaguyo's will was bent down and mimicking the gestures of heaving, though he highly suspected the thing had no stomach to speak of, Obito having managed to squirm away defiantly. Hey there, you ugly son of a bitch! Looking up at him disgruntledly, the possessed Naruto gave a Cheshire smile, which bore his elongated fangs as he descended upon his prey. Tell the old hag Gigi sends his regards. Well, what now? No supernatural connection was needed for him to interpret this question poised on that coitus face. It was genuine, unlike the false innocence plastered on top which served as a fly trap to those less savvy. At least that's what he believed, never really understanding what went on behind that garish angelic visage, nor pretending to. High flaunting swords said that the eyes were windows to the soul, hers were mutable. What lay behind the shuffling faster than a magician with a deck of cards? So for him, there was never any reason to try. Get me on that one, doll. Leaning back on his impromptu chair, he shrugged his shoulders dismissively. Oh, don't look at me like that. You really do look like a little girl playing dress up in that thing. Each word he spoke to her was a gamble, and he never knew quite what to lay in the cards. White eyes might roll sarcastically, brown might jeer and stick out her tongue childishly. Just as easily, Pink might stick that blade through his gut as he reclined on the unconscious pile of white fang they had collectively stacked up in the last 12 hours. Closing his eyes, he waited with the disinterest of a long-time addict to see which it was. A breeze tousled his orange hair and caused him to rejoin reality, noting that his recaptured bowler was missing yet again. Chuckling, he knew it hadn't gone far. Yes, yes, very cute. It's like looking at my future daughter, or maybe son. Ow! Rubbing his tender ribs, he grimaced at the young woman currently sporting his prized possession and flaunting it with a delicate curtsy. A familiar shaking of the shoulders under that baggy garment ruined the walkway image and told him she was giggling, laughing, and he was on the inside while feigning annoyance without. The two of them were liars, him with his words and her with her actions, not very good ones either, for both could read through the other's tells as easy as reading the suit dealt to the hand. For all the air of unpredictability and danger they presented, they were disgustingly simple. But that was the story they liked to believe. Well, I doubt they're going to bother looking for us after all this. Roman spread his arms wide to illustrate the apocalyptic scene, which had once been a ritzy part downtown Vale. But there's not much reason to stick around either. Can't shake down the fools whose knees are already rattling as it is. What was the point in robbing those who had nothing? Go to hell, bad dog! Scolding the body laying beneath him, he shifted so that he could whack the fawness upside his dog-eared head with his cane. No barking! Certainly, though, someone like him couldn't stay anonymous for long. Disaster or no, it was doubtful the survivors would tolerate being shaken down after the hell they had been through, and the veterans of Beacon were as hell wouldn't cut them any slack. As such, and as much as he hated to admit it, perhaps it was time to move on. Nothing good lasts forever, huh? He asked rhetorically as he ambled to his feet, stretching to relieve his shoulders of the cramped conditions of the cell as well as the exercise he just put them through. This gesture contradicted as a weight settled itself there, adjusting his hat as Neil kicked her feet petulantly against her steed. he was forced to goof off and amend this offhanded statement. Yes, of course, except for you. Looking up at his faithful partner with eyes no longer bearing their costume, he asked, "So, where to now?" His compass jabbing her parasol into the direction of the morning sun, unwavering in this course chosen at random. "All right then, let's go." Feeling that familiar tug on his soul as it hits along for the ride, he glanced over his burdened shoulders to see that the symbol of humanity's defiance continued to stand erect, proud over the level remains of her accomplishments. "Figures," he grumbled almost wistfully. "Can't seem to win against fools. Life isn't fair. Only a fool believes that it is. Maybe I am that fool for trying to give it a happy ending, as if an act of self-sacrifice could sway the universe. Still, we try, despite knowing that there is no one there at the end to weigh the goodness of our souls. We try for the possibility, despite the knowledge that it may not give us anything in turn. We try for the sake of others, despite the sheer futility of manipulating this already rigged lottery. We try because there is nothing else to do. Better it be a lottery than an elite club, for the one still gives hope. Hope that the bouncer lets you and your friend in. Hope that the faded numbers in your hand are picked. Hope that in the overflow of people and the events which constitute a life you are not forgotten. Because every now and then, through pure chance, life finds reason to be incredibly, unrepentantly, inescapably kind. End of chapter 37.